The first thing retired Marine Staff Sergeant Miles Carter, 52, noticed wasn't the smoke. It was the silence. A strange, heavy quiet had settled over the morning, like something was holding its breath. That kind of silence, unnatural, electric, didn't come often. And when it did, Miles knew better than to ignore it. That instinct? It never really left you, not after 2 tours in Iraq and a decade trying to forget what you'd seen. He was standing on his porch, cradling a chipped mug of black coffee, wearing an old hoodie and his combat boots, the same ones he'd kept after discharge. The porch was his haven, the place he'd rebuilt himself piece by piece. And right there, proudly displayed in a locked, glass-covered case bolted to the railing, was the one thing that had made it home with him in one piece: his combat flag. Then he caught the smell. Not campfire, not barbecue, something artificial, bitter, the kind of burn that wraps around your throat and won't let go. It smelled like regret dipped in gasoline. He turned toward the breeze, eyes narrowing. Smoke, trailing up from behind the Silverbrook Estates HOA office, curling low and thick like it was sneaking away from a crime scene. And then it fell. A scorched triangle of fabric floated down like a wounded bird, blackened, twisted, and unmistakable. The mug slipped from his hand and shattered. He didn't flinch, he was already moving. Behind the HOA building near the dumpsters, the smoke was thicker. The smell hit harder. His boots crunched glass, and then he saw it. The flag, his flag, from his last deployment. The one he kept on the porch every Memorial Day. The one that had soaked in blood and desert, heat, and somehow made it home. Now it lay half-folded, its frame cracked, one corner singed clean through. Still recognizable, still defiant, still standing, even in ruin. Miles knelt beside it. He didn't speak, didn't curse. He just picked it up gently, like the way you'd carry a fallen brother. Then he walked straight to the HOA office. Inside, Karen Brewster, 46, head of the HOA, looked up from her desk. She wore her usual smug, seafoam blouse and that tight-lipped smile she probably practiced in the mirror. "Miles, what a surprise," she chirped. He said nothing, just placed the scorched flag case on her desk. Smoke still curled off its edges like a warning. "This yours?" he asked, voice low. Karen blinked like she'd just been handed a used tissue. Oh my, that looks damaged." "It was on my porch," Miles said, "bolted down, in a sealed case, until someone tore it out, set it on fire, and tossed it in the garbage." Karen stood slowly, folding her arms in a practiced, concerned neighbor pose. "Was it properly secured?" "I told you," he said, "it was bolted." She nodded like a customer service rep from hell. "Well, the HOA recently passed a motion to review all exterior displays, especially items that are emotionally provocative or politically sensitive. We're aiming for visual cohesion." Miles stared at her. That flag had covered the bodies of 2 of his men. That flag had come home with more scars than he had. And she wanted to call it emotionally provocative? "That flag," he said, "isn't a decoration. It's not a garden gnome. It's the only piece of a battlefield I brought back that didn't bleed." Karen's voice dropped a tone. "Let's not get emotional, Mr. Carter." He stepped forward, slowly. "This isn't emotion," he said, eyes locked on hers. "This is discipline. You'd know the difference if you'd ever had to hold someone's hand while they died under one of those flags." The room went cold. Then the door creaked open behind him. "Smells like someone lit patriotism on fire," came a familiar voice. Jalen Thompson, 30, Miles' next-door neighbor and fellow vet, strolled in with a bag of powdered donuts and a frown. Flip-flops slapped the floor. Karen exhaled sharply. "Mr. Thompson, this is an official meeting." Jalen pointed at the flag. "You burned a combat flag. That's not just disrespectful. That's a damn crime." Karen bristled. "No one burned anything. Perhaps a board member overstepped, but all actions were within approved guidelines." "Guidelines you rewrote," Miles said, "without a community vote." Karen's face twitched, just barely. "Miles, I understand you're upset." "I'm not upset," he said coldly. "I'm calculating." Jalen whistled low. "Now, that's a phrase I haven't heard since Basra." They walked out together. No more words, no goodbyes. Back on the porch, Lena, Miles' wife, was already waiting. She didn't ask questions. She saw the case and knew. "They really did it," she whispered. He nodded. She reached out, brushed her fingers along the burned cloth. They came back black with ash. That night, they sat in silence. The flag lay between them, a casualty of peace. The air still smelled like smoke, but something inside Miles was already burning hotter than fire. They hadn't just set his flag on fire. They had set off a war, and they were about to learn that the worst thing you can do is push a man who's already been through hell and made it back standing. The next morning, Miles Carter opened his front door and found a letter waiting for him. Folded crisp, slipped neatly into an envelope with a gold HOA seal that gleamed like it had something to hide. He didn't need to open it to know it wasn't an apology. Inside, the tone was colder than the paper it was printed on. "Notice of violation, final warning, Clause 4.8, non-conforming display. Clause 12, improper symbolism on community-facing fixtures. Clause 15, persistent refusal to uphold neighborhood standards. The fine, $1,000, with an additional $200 per day if he didn't remove the flag, the same one they had already burned." Miles let the letter fall onto the porch table, right beside the scorched flag case. Lena stood beside him, arms folded. She read the letter in silence, jaw tight. "They're not just punishing you," she said. "They're rewriting history and making you the villain." He didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, he sat down in the chair he'd built after retirement, the one that had cradled more sleepless nights than he could count, and stared out at the spot where the flag used to hang. The wind nudged the empty bracket. It squeaked. 2 hours later, a second note arrived, hand-delivered. This time by a kid in a Maplebrook HOA intern t-shirt who couldn't look him in the eye. Inside was an invitation, no, a summons, to the next HOA meeting. Agenda item 3B, Community Disciplinary Review. Translation: they weren't just fining him, they were making him a public example. Jalen came by that afternoon, powdered donut in one hand and frustration in the other. "You're not the only one," he said, dropping a folder on the porch. "I did some digging. Turns out a lot of folks around here have been hit lately. Fines, violations, silent threats. And every one of them, veterans, widows, long-timers." Miles opened the folder and flipped through pages. Letters, fines, photos, a mural painted by a retired Army medic's grandson, covered over with beige paint and marked graffiti. A flagpole removed from a widow's yard without notice. Decorations labeled visual pollution. It wasn't coincidence, it was a pattern, a purge disguised as policy. And then Jalen pulled out the last sheet, a zoning map. Not public, not labeled for residents. On it, Miles's house blinked in red. Next to it, in a digital note, high-risk parcel, strategic transition pending. Around it were dots, more red, each representing someone the board had flagged. It wasn't about harmony. It was about removal, erasure. And veterans like Miles? They weren't part of the new vision. "This isn't regulation," Miles muttered, eyes scanning the map like a battlefield layout. "This is a quiet war." Jalen nodded, deadly serious for once. "You're not wrong. And guess what I found next?" He flipped his tablet around. A memo, internal use only. HOA board meeting minutes, never uploaded to the public site. In it, Karen's voice was transcribed verbatim. "If we squeeze hard enough, he'll leave. The fines are working. If not, we use option 2. Miles leaned back, his hands tightening into fists. "Option 2? He asked. Jalen swallowed. "Private removal order of everything they consider non-compliant. That means you, man, your house, your story." Lena stepped onto the porch, having overheard. She was holding a folder of her own. Printouts, photos, copies of every letter they'd ever received. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, but with restraint. "They're trying to erase you, Miles," she said quietly. "Not just your flag, not just your porch, you." He didn't speak, not yet. But something behind his eyes shifted, hardened. That night the porch was dark, the flag was still gone. But the case, scorched and cracked, remained on the table like a tombstone. Miles didn't go inside. He didn't need sleep. He needed a plan. Because now it was clear they weren't just burning a flag, they were lighting the match to burn down everything he stood for. And come next HOA meeting, Miles Carter wouldn't be the one on trial. They would. Miles Carter didn't fight his battles with fists anymore. He fought with proof, discipline, and precision. The next morning, Lena came outside with a thick binder clutched to her chest. She had stayed up all night printing every letter, violation, and email. Every fine, every clause, every line of policy rewritten without a vote. Jalen arrived just after sunrise, carrying coffee and a stack of files labeled Evidence Phase 1. They were done playing defense. Jalen flipped open his laptop. "Remember that zoning map? I found a tab marked Internal Use Only." He clicked it open. There it was, in plain text. Long-term owner resistance expected. Use phased enforcement and community isolation to encourage early exits. Community isolation. That's what they called it. Make the veterans feel alone. Make them feel like the problem. Lena's voice cut through the quiet. "This isn't a policy, Miles. This is psychological warfare in khakis." That afternoon, a knock at the door came. Not Karen, not a sheriff. Paul Jensen, the HOA treasurer, stood on the porch, sunglasses on, holding a brown folder like it might explode. "I'm not supposed to be here," he said quietly, glancing down the street. "But you need to see this." Miles took the folder, eyes narrowing. Inside were private meeting notes, the real ones. Not the sanitized agendas they posted online, but the kind that got whispered behind closed doors. He won't leave with pressure alone. The fines are helping, but if he holds out, we'll authorize forced transition. Target the porch next, then the deck. Miles looked up. "You knew this was happening?" Paul's eyes dropped. "I didn't read everything. I trusted Karen. I thought it was just beautification." "Beautification," Miles echoed. "That what they called it when they burned a combat flag?" Paul flinched. "I was never here," he muttered, and backed away. Jalen, standing just behind Miles, muttered, "This is getting dark, Gunny." Miles didn't respond. He was already thinking in battle terms now. Fronts, flanks, weak points. He stared at the scorched flag case on the table. They want quiet surrender. Let's give them a loud reckoning instead. That evening, Monroe called. Retired Command Sergeant Major, decorated, feared, respected. The kind of man whose voice had once sliced through battlefield noise like steel on steel. "I heard whispers, Carter," he said. Karen's name's been floating around in some very familiar circles. She's not just power-hungry, she's connected. Miles filled him in, the flag, the fines, the secret agenda. "You ready to go loud?" Monroe asked. "Not just yet," Miles replied. "I want them to feel safe. Then I'll make them wish they weren't." Monroe chuckled. "I'll prep the team. You'll need 3 fronts: legal, optical, structural. You win 2, the third folds." And so the mission began. Lena began organizing the evidence board on their garage wall, a war room in suburbia. Jalen called in favors, press contacts, military influencers, old friends with big voices and bigger followings. Monroe sent the name of a retired JAG attorney, Captain Avery Dent, known for taking HOA boards to federal court and winning. Miles made the call. "Avery, this is Miles Carter." "I've seen your file," she replied immediately. "Monroe sent it. I've seen enough." "You believe me?" "I believe patterns, and yours stinks." She paused. "Don't go public yet. Let them keep thinking they're winning, then we hit back all at once." But Karen wasn't done. 2 days later, another envelope appeared, thinner, smaller, more surgical. A restraining order, filed by the HOA, signed by a judge. Miles Carter, former Marine, was now legally banned from contacting any board member, even by email, even at meetings. The reason? Escalating hostility and elevated potential for aggression due to military background. Jalen exploded. "They used your service record against you?" Lena stood frozen in the kitchen, the order shaking in her hands, not from fear, but from the restraint it took not to scream. Miles didn't shout, didn't storm off. He just looked at the scorched flag case. His jaw clenched. "They think silence means surrender," he said. "It doesn't." That night, they started prepping for the HOA meeting. Not just attending, taking it over. The whiteboard was filled with timelines, names, dates, evidence. Lena laid out a new flag, a backup, smaller but untouched. Jalen built a slideshow. Monroe prepared a remote Zoom line. And Miles? He stood in the garage, staring at the uniform he hadn't touched in years. Then slowly, he lifted it down from the hook. It was time. Not for vengeance, for justice. The night before the meeting, Miles stood on his porch with the wind brushing against his shoulders, dressed in full Marine dress blues. The medals on his chest didn't gleam for vanity. They gleamed for memory. Lena stepped beside him, holding the scorched flag case wrapped in a cloth like a sacred relic. Jalen stood off to the side, checking the live stream settings. He'd already posted a teaser on social media. Tomorrow, a Marine faces the HOA that burned his flag. This isn't just a meeting, it's a reckoning. The post had over 100,000 views by morning. At 6:03 p.m., Miles arrived at the Maplebrook Community Center. No music, no drama. Just the sound of his boots on gravel and the soft creak of Lena opening the car door behind him. Jalen carried a Bluetooth speaker slung under his arm. The Zoom feed was live. Monroe was patched in. 2 veterans, Staff Sergeant Jacobs and Lieutenant Cruz, stood waiting at the entrance in uniform. They had shown up without being asked, because word had spread. This wasn't a homeowner's complaint anymore. This was a moment. The parking lot was full. People stood shoulder to shoulder, some in lawn chairs, some with flags, some just holding phones recording. Inside, the HOA board sat at a folding table up front. Karen wore a bright yellow blazer and a tight-lipped smirk, already gripping her clipboard like a sword. She didn't even flinch when Miles walked in. But she noticed the flag case, and the uniform, and the crowd. Miles walked to the podium slowly, placing the case down. He didn't say a word at first. He didn't have to. Karen clicked on her mic. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone this is a formal—" A voice cut her off from the second row. Captain Avery Dent. "Then let's treat it like one," she said sharply, "which means records, evidence, and accountability." Karen froze. Then Monroe's voice came through the Bluetooth speaker, loud, crisp, calm. "Evening, everyone. I've got 40 years in national security and zero tolerance for HOA bullies. Hope no one minds if I tune in." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Jalen rolled a whiteboard into place next to Miles and clicked the remote. Slide 1. A photo of the burnt flag in the dumpster. Slide 2. The violation letter with emotionally polarizing highlighted in red. Slide 3. The internal HOA documents showing names of veteran homeowners flagged for strategic transition. Slide 4. Karen's voice, transcribed, "He's just a porch warrior with PTSD." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. A woman in the front row gasped. A man in the back muttered, "That's my address." Karen slammed her mic. "This is a political stunt." Miles stepped forward. His voice was calm, cold, measured. "Karen, I buried 2 Marines under the flag you burned. I carried it through Iraq. It survived 2 IEDs, and then it died on your watch, behind a recycling bin." The silence that followed was deafening. "I came here for peace. I built a home. I flew that flag every Memorial Day for the men who didn't make it back. And you tried to erase it, with fines, with threats, with a restraining order that used my service against me." Hands were going up. People were standing now. Mr. Lee, Vietnam vet, spoke up. "They painted over my grandson's mural, said it was graffiti, it was a flag." Mrs. Rodriguez stood. "They took my husband's medals off our porch, called them visual clutter." Mr. Parks, cane in hand, voice shaking with fury. "They pulled my flagpole while I was at the VA." Karen was unraveling. "This is harassment," she snapped. "Emotional manipulation." Avery stood again. "This is justice." Karen turned to Paul. "Tell them, Paul, this wasn't just me." Paul stood slowly, trembling. I didn't read everything. Karen told us it was temporary. I didn't know." "You signed 3 removal notices," Jalen shouted. Paul dropped his head. "I didn't know," he repeated. Then Miles lifted the scorched flag case high. "You tried to erase men like me from this neighborhood, from this town, from this country. But we're still here." The room erupted, not just applause, not just cheers, a roar. Monroe spoke through the speaker again, steady and firm. "This is just the first roll call, Karen." Karen sat back in her chair. Clipboard gone, power gone. That yellow blazer now wrinkled with sweat. The board voted that night unanimously. All fines revoked. All strategic transition plans terminated. Karen removed from her position. An official apology issued to Miles and every other targeted homeowner. The next morning, Miles stood on his porch once more. He unfolded a new flag. Smaller, brighter, clean, untouched. The wind caught it just right. Red like sacrifice, white like resolve, blue like freedom. Lena stepped beside him and whispered, "You didn't come home when the war ended, Miles. You came home when the fighting stopped." For the first time in months, the porch was quiet, and the silence didn't feel threatening. It felt earned, peaceful. Miles Carter stood there in the golden light of morning, a cup of black coffee in one hand, the new flag waving gently above him. This one hadn't seen war, hadn't smelled smoke or blood, but it was still sacred because of what it now represented. Not just survival, but vindication. The battle was over, and this time he had come home whole. 3 days after the meeting, a handwritten letter arrived, not typed, not cold, not bureaucratic. "Dear Mr. Carter, On behalf of the newly restructured Maplebrook HOA, we wish to extend our sincerest apology. All citations and disciplinary actions issued to you have been officially revoked. Additionally, all Phase 2 redevelopment initiatives have been canceled effective immediately. We humbly invite you to consider serving on the new board. Respectfully, the homeowners of Maplebrook. Miles read it once, then again. He handed it to Lena, who didn't smile. She just folded it carefully and set it under the flag case on the table. "I'm not joining any board," Miles said simply. "I already have the best seat in the neighborhood." Paul, the former treasurer, stopped by later that afternoon. He came empty-handed. No clipboard, no folder. Just a man with tired eyes and a look of regret. "I should have spoken up sooner," he said. "I thought keeping quiet was being neutral. But now I know it was being complicit." Miles didn't offer forgiveness. Not yet, but he nodded once, and that was enough, for now. Jalen returned with his usual swagger, holding a pink donut box and a roll of caution tape. "Just in case they try something dumb," he grinned. He sat beside Miles, took a bite of a jelly-filled donut, and looked out at the freshly painted porch railing, the new flagpole, the bracket reinforced with steel. "No more letters?" he asked. Miles shook his head. "Just cookies. Someone left a plate on the rail yesterday." "Progress," Jalen said, raising his donut like a toast. They sat in easy silence, the kind you don't take for granted. That night, Miles opened a bin in the garage he hadn't touched in years. Inside, old service medals, his folded uniform, and a collection of letters from men who never made it back. He pulled out a photo, dusty, edges worn, a squad of young Marines, sweaty and grinning, standing beneath a battered flag. Some of them were gone now, but some still lived in every breath Miles took. Every board he nailed on that porch. Every time he refused to be erased. Later that week, Monroe called. His voice was rough as ever, but laced with something rare. Pride. "You did good, Carter. You stayed steady. You stood your ground. And you reminded them what a porch is supposed to mean." "It's not just wood and nails," Miles replied. "It's where we remember, where we keep watch, and where we plant the flag," Monroe said. They ended the call without goodbyes. Veterans didn't need them. Weeks passed. Karen moved out in silence. No statement, no farewell. Just a U-Haul, a cardboard box on her lap, and sunglasses that couldn't hide the way she glanced at the flag as they drove past. She didn't wave. Miles didn't either. She retreated slowly down the street, like a storm breaking apart on the horizon. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the wind rustled the trees, Miles stood on his porch, one hand resting on the flag case. Lena stepped beside him and wrapped her arm through his. "You okay?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yeah, I'm home." Behind them, neighbors passed and waved. A little boy on a bike paused to salute the flag, then pedaled away. An older woman left a basket of muffins without a word, just a warm smile. And on that porch, where once there was fire, now there was peace. Not because the fight had never come, but because he fought back and won. Spring arrived quietly, as if the earth itself had exhaled. The flowers around the Carter porch bloomed brighter that year. Lena said it was the soil. Miles thought maybe it was something deeper. Maybe, when you fight for your ground, it remembers. Neighbors who once passed with quick glances now stopped to chat. Veterans began putting up their own flags again, smaller at first, hesitant. But day by day more appeared. Miles noticed every one of them, and he saluted each as if it were a brother standing guard. One Saturday morning, a knock came at the door. It was Eli, the boy who always rode by on his bike and saluted the flag. He was maybe 10, all elbows and curiosity. "Mr. Carter," he said shyly, holding out a school paper, "I wrote about you for my Veterans Day project." Miles took the paper with quiet hands. The title at the top made his chest tighten. "The Man Who Fought Without a Rifle." He read each word about the burned flag, the meeting, the moment Miles stood in uniform. And at the end, Eli had written, "He didn't fight for revenge. He fought to remind people what respect means, and he did it from his porch." Miles looked up, eyes misted. "You did real good, son." Eli smiled. "Think I could put a flag up, too?" "Tell you what," Miles said, kneeling. "I've got an extra. But you don't just fly it. You protect what it stands for." "I will," Eli whispered, like he understood something far bigger than himself. That night, Miles placed a small wooden plaque on his porch wall. Hand-carved, it read, "Here, we remember. Here, we stand." Lena ran her fingers across the letters, then leaned her head on his shoulder. "You think they'll ever forget what happened here?" she asked. Miles shook his head. "Number. Because now we've given them something they can't bury with fines and forms. We gave them truth, and we gave them each other." A few weeks later, a community event was held in the park. No HOA clipboards, no tape measures, just neighbors, veterans, kids, and stories. Jalen took the mic halfway through, loud and unfiltered as always. "Let's be real," he grinned. "This neighborhood didn't get better because someone enforced the rules. It got better because one man stayed on his porch and reminded the rest of us why we built homes here in the first place." Miles stood at the back, arms crossed, hat low, quietly smiling. As the sun set that evening, he returned to the porch one last time. He stood still for a moment, listening not for threats, but for peace. Then he lifted his gaze to the flag. It moved in the breeze, not defiant this time, but at ease, not fighting, not warning, just waving, like a sentinel no longer on high alert but still watching, always watching. Miles sat down in his favorite chair. Lena brought him tea this time, and beside them young Eli's new flag fluttered across the street. Because some battles are fought with bullets, some with words, but the most important ones? With memory, with truth, with the courage to stay when silence would be easier. And in that neighborhood, on that porch, under that flag, legacy lived on. Life lesson, the power of standing your ground. In a world that often rewards silence over resistance, Miles Carter taught us that real courage isn't always loud, it's steady. He didn't raise his voice, but he raised the truth. He didn't throw punches, but he stood his ground when his past, his pride, and his principles were under fire. This story reminds us that home is more than walls and fences. It's the space where dignity lives, where memory breathes, and where we pass down not just stories, but standards. When injustice comes, dressed in politeness, in policies or in HOA bylaws, we must be bold enough to call it what it is, and brave enough to confront it. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is not walk away. Sometimes the most powerful weapon you carry is what you refuse to let them take. And when you stand firm, for truth, for honor, for legacy, you don't just protect a flag. You protect what it means to truly come home.